Hello, seekers of knowledge. By this time, you've been able to create a coordinate axes and graph simple functions using Geometry Sketchpad. In this tutorial, you'll see how to create a slider, which is so important in making the functions dynamic, being able to change them in infinitely number of ways. We'll also look at some ways to improve your sketch by learning how to hide objects and change their colors. We'll also spend a brief time just deepening your understanding of what we mean by a parameter and how parameters change functions. And lastly, something I hope that you've come across, which is the help menu from Sketchpad. It has a wealth of resources available to you to help answer many of the questions that you've had and many more questions that you'll have as you go through this project. So let's do some more learning. I have a Geometry Sketchpad here with the slider already created. It's this blue segment with an endpoint B. And just for a moment, I want you to observe what happens as I drag the point B. If I drag B to the right, you'll see the value of B increasing. It's getting bigger than 1 at this time. And as I move B back to the left, the value of B is decreasing. And if I move B left of that starting point, then it becomes a negative value. These sliders are really important in creating the parameters for your linear functions. And so let's just see how it's made. The slider is actually made on a line. It's this green dash line here. And what you should observe is the value that you see down here really comes from this ratio. It's the ratio of the length of AB, which is this segment here, the blue one, divided by the length of AC, which is the red line segment from A to C. And observe at this time, point B is just a little more than halfway from A to C. Therefore, the value is greater than 0.5. If I were to drag it to almost exactly halfway, you can see that the ratio is close to 0.5. The closer I get to C, the closer the value gets to 1. If I get to point B exactly on C, then the two lengths, AB and AC, are both equivalent, so the ratio is equal to 1. As I drag point B past C, then that length AB becomes bigger than AC, so my ratio is larger than 1. And as I move point B closer to A, then the value of B gets smaller and smaller. I can make B fall right on top of A, which means AB has a length of 0. AC remains constant. It always stays the same length, and so my ratio is 0. It plays a bit of a trick here because if I move B to the left of A, I really don't have a negative distance. We never have a negative distance. But because the point is left of A, we say that it's negative. So that's how you get some negative values. So let's see how it's actually made. We'll go to a blank sketch and let me create my coordinate axes. I'm going to stretch my unit point a little further to the right to make my grid larger. And what I want to start with is that line. So I'm going to go to the tool palette, press on the segment tool, drag it out to the line tool, and then I simply like to make my sliders towards the lower part of the sketch and on the left hand side. So I'm going to click to create my first control point for the line. And the second control point, I just want it off to the right here. Yeah, it's not going to be used further on other than to make this line. So I'm just going to release it there. And then on the line itself, what I want to create are three points. I don't want to use either of the control points, so I clicked my point tool. I'm going to make a point here and here and here. Somewhat random, but they're down in the lower left part of the coordinate axes. And it's these 3 points that I'm going to create my ratio. Now, to do that, the order that you select these in is important. So I'm going to click on the first point, select it. Then I'm going to go to the third point, select it. That's going to be my denominator, the distance from this point to this point. And then I'm going to click the middle point, and that's going to be the distance for my numerator from the beginning to the middle point. So selecting those 3 points, I then go up to measure, and under measure I have ratio. So I'm going to measure the ratio, And there's the ratio we saw in the previous sketch. The length of AB from A to B divided by the length of AC. And at the moment, AB is slightly less than half of AC. As I move B to the right, you see the same things happening with the value of my ratio. There's the slider actually, but it doesn't look much like a slider, so let's do a little cleaning up to make it look more presentable. The line itself that I first started with, I really don't want to see that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the control point on the left, I'm going to select the line and the other control point, and then I'm going to go to Display and Hide Objects. This is important to remember. Hiding is quite different than deleting. I rarely want to delete something unless I know it's clearly wrong. In this case, I don't want to delete the line, I just want to hide it. So when I release it, the line that I started with is now hidden. And that's important. It's hidden. It's still there. If I drag B, B is restricted to that line. I can't move it up or down. I can move it right or left on the line, but it stays on the line. The other thing that I want to do is I want to create a line segment from A to B. So I go up to my tool palette, press on that tool, select the line segment, then create a line segment from A to B. And that's actually going to be the segment representing my slider. The other things that I'm choosing to hide are I don't want to necessarily see this endpoint A. It could be left there if you chose to, but I'm going to choose to hide it. And I don't want to see point C. That's just hanging out there in space. So I select those two. I make a double check to make sure that nothing else is selected because I don't want to hide something that I don't mean to. So I've selected points A and C, go up to Display, Hide Points, and points A and C are now hidden. So there's the slider labeled point B. If I want to change the color of that slider, I again use the display menu, but I have to first select the segment, make sure everything else is deselected, then go up to display, and this time I choose color, and let's make it a red color. So now the slider is a different color. So that's how you make a slider. And it's important that you understand that because when you create your functions, these sliders are going to represent your parameters. So let's take a quick moment to just explain further what a parameter actually is. Although it may look like parameters are variables, things that change, and in many ways they do change, but they're not really the variables of the equation. So looking at this sketch, I've got the equation in slope-intercept form. The blue coefficient is the slope, the red constant is the y-intercept. And if I just leave this particular line as is, I do have a point here, it's point P. Point P has the coordinates x and y. And observe what happens to those coordinates for point P as I move the point along the line. Those coordinates are changing. Those are truly variables. X and y changes as I move the point P on the line. However, the parameters are not changing. This particular line, 1x plus 1, has these properties. And so every point on the line has an x and y value. If I, however, create a different line by changing the parameters, I can do that with my slider, and now I have a different line. It's still linear, but the slope is 1.5. So I did change the coefficient of x, but that's not a variable. It's just creating a different line. And again, as I move this point P, I now have a new set of x and y values because I have a different line that x and y is being represented by. That's the difference between parameters and the variables. The variables are x and f of x, or y. The parameters, although they do change, they just create different members of the linear family as I change those different values. There's one more topic we want to cover in this tutorial, and that's the help menu. If you've not discovered it already, you certainly should take a look at it. If you, within Sketchpad, and you have to be hooked up to the internet, If you select the help menu, there are just many, many different areas that you should explore with. There's a good reference center here, which pretty much just gives you explanations and an index of all the different parts of Sketchpad. But there are also quite a few tutorials that Sketchpad provides, and they give you lots of activities you can play around with. And then there's an online resource center that has many sketches that have been created by other students, by other adults, and they're kind of fun to look at too. But as you're exploring the program and learning more about it to complete this project, use the help menu because very often you can get your questions answered there, in addition to learning many, many more things about how Sketchpad works. That's it for this tutorial. There's one more to go. So let's get back to work.